We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Before this show, Thomas sent me a picture and he said, would you ever wear this hat? And it has an extremely 90s baseball cap, Dolphins baseball cap on Marino. And I said, brother, I had that hat.
This is Remember That Game, the podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is a throwback to an episode we did, Dolphins-Chargers, 1994 Divisional, with Denny Carter, now of NBC Sports and creator of Bad Faith Times. You want some Dan Marino, some Natron Means, and some being owned through the run game? Well, this could be for you. We'll now throw it back to June 2020. Our first returning guest, Denny, are you ready to dive down into your Dolphins past?
I am. I'm ready to do that once again with you, Thomas. I appreciate and I'm honored to be your first return guest. I don't think I've enjoyed being on a podcast as much as I did when we talked about the Dolphins back in January.
The history of the Bills giving you swirlies throughout the 90s as and seeing him get in different situations where he'd had great seasons, but maybe the defense wasn't right, maybe the supporting cast wasn't right. How excited were you going into this one in January 95, the divisional round on the road in San Diego as only 3-point dogs?
Yeah, so that season felt different. I have to say, I think that was his first year back from the Achilles.
Yep.
And he came out the season opener through 400 yards and I think 5 touchdowns against Drew Bledsoe and the Patriots in one of the classic Marino games, maybe one of the classic NFL games, honestly. And that team felt different because the defense, it wasn't great, but they could stand their ground once in a while. They didn't bleed yardage and touchdowns like they had years prior. Back then I remember thinking, if Marino only had a running game, and because this was the Stone Ages, and we didn't understand that the running game did not open up the passing game. In fact, it's the opposite. But back then, that was the common thinking that a quarterback, any quarterback, no matter how good, needed an elite running game. And so you just waited and waited and waited. As a Dolphins fan, you waited for Marino to have a great running back and a great defense, and that would be the year. Well, this year that we're talking about, the 94-95 season, it was half of that. It was a good defense, still no running game. But, truth be known, I don't think Marino even wanted a running game. I think that his ego was so big that he wanted to win or lose on his arm.
Yeah, and a very strange game when looking in the context of how 1990s football typically went. The Dolphins in this game would lead for just about all of it. Marino would throw 38 passes. They'd only run 8 times despite holding that much of a lead. The Chargers, despite trailing almost the entire game, found a way to run the ball 40 times.
Oh, unbelievable. Oh, man. Those Chargers, those 94-95 Chargers were a very high testosterone team.
And this is a foreshadowing of a game we're going to play at some point in this episode that is inspired by the Living the Stream podcast and your Twitter account. And the game will be called I'm Not Owned. and I'll bring up different situations, and you'll decide whether or not you're actually owned. And the Chargers running 40 times and coming back, you can make the case whether you were or whether you are not owned.
Right, that's a tough call. I'm gonna say that I've never been owned online, but I did feel as a fan, as a Dolphins fan who knew that Marino's clock was ticking at that time. I knew that I had been owned offline when the Chargers eventually won that game. So this was the I don't know if I'm sure you're gonna set this up for the audience here, but this was the second round of the playoffs, correct?
Yep.
And the Dolphins had beaten someone at home the week before. Is that right?
They bounced Joe Montana in his final NFL game.
Yes, right. And that was an incredible win. And I remember watching that. I went to a restaurant with my family when that game came on, and I was sweating over that game. And I was thinking, oh my God, like, we can put an end to Montana. This is great. Because, of course, since Montana was one of the greats, all-time greats, I naturally hated him. So, I just wanted my guy to finally get a win against everybody else's guy, So that was awesome.
One of my favorite anecdotes from the first episode of this podcast is when you mentioned how, because you started watching football more in the early 90s, and you saw purely Montana on the Chiefs, which is still pretty good, but not Niners days quite. And you wondering aloud why everyone thinks Montana is so good in front of your father's friends.
That's right. Yeah. And they were horrified because they had seen him in his prime. And I'm like, so wait, why did it take so long for them to realize Steve Young was way better than Montana? Yeah. And then of course I embarrassed myself as a 10-year-old. I embarrassed myself.
As two adult men in our 30s, let's figure out if we're going to embarrass ourselves with this question.
Okay.
Could you say Marino was the best parts of Brady and Montana, but with a better arm and worse organization?
Yeah, I love that question, and I think you're onto something. I think as far as everybody talks about Brady's will to win and his fire, and determination. Marino had that in spades. Marino was an absolute monster to his teammates on the field. Just the worst teammate you could possibly ask for. Dressing down rookie pass catchers if they made a mistake on the field, whether it was a route running mistake. And, we see this tradition passed on. We see Aaron Rodgers doing this now with his guys. So I think that he does have those traits of those two guys. But the Dolphins organization was not good. It was not good. They made a lot of bad draft picks. They made a lot of bad trades in those days. So I think that you're really onto something there.
This is from the pregame lead up. You have Dick Enberg. The color commentator was named Bob Trumpy. I hadn't heard that name before. I'm a little triggered by it.
Is that the president's secret announcer name?
Yeah, this is how he communicates with journalists in the early 90s, famously. Before the game, they said, and this is 1995, there are times when Marino just plays in his zone, like Michael Jordan used to play basketball. 1995.
Wow.
You can't stop him no matter what defense you draw up. And to set the stage here, Marino hadn't thrown an interception 4 games. He had just outplayed Joe Montana in the wild card. To close the season, so he's coming back from a torn Achilles, which is unheard of at that time.
Yeah.
Week 1, 5 touchdowns, 472 yards against Parcells and the Patriots. And then down the stretch, he has the fake spike game against the Jets for a comeback win against a Jets team with Pete Carroll that was neck and neck with them for the division. So they send the Jets season spiraling like they would many times in the 90s. And then, like Marino owns the Jets, the following week they would lose to the Buffalo Bills. They got swept by the Bills, even though the Bills missed the playoffs this year. That's just how the 90s would go for Marino. They lose at a pesky Indianapolis team, Jim Harbaugh, Marshall Faulk, Jim Johnson managing the defense. But then a must-win game as far as winning the division, Week 17, they beat a Lions team at home that had playoff implications and was a playoff team, and then dismissed Joe Montana in the wild card. So coming back from a torn Achilles. He's top 3 in net yards per attempt behind Young and Aikman. Coming off the Achilles, the number 1 total offense in the NFL. There was no Michael Jordan playing basketball at the time, and these announcers were positing Dan Marino as that killer instinct guy to fill the void.
Right, and they had seen him play for a long time, and I remember there was a Monday night game where a linebacker for Pittsburgh, I think his name was Greg Lloyd.
Yeah,
possibly Greg Lloyd, real big, mean, like very typical Steelers dude. He picked Marino up and drove him into the ground and broke his collarbone. Oh. And Marino didn't lie there writhing. Instead, he grabbed Lloyd's jersey and pulled him down and said something unspeakable to him and wouldn't let go of him until the refs came over and broke him up. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. But, you know, the heartbreak that the Dolphins were and experienced in the 90s is reflected in the famous Hootie and the Blowfish lyric, the Dolphins Make Me Cry, which when I first heard that lyric as a kid, I thought, no way does that lyric mean what I think it means, because it has to be some, you know, artistic flourish that I just don't understand. But no, he was actually at the Miami Dolphins make him cry, and I was like, I can relate because I've literally cried many times over these stupid Dolphins.
I had no idea that was related. You also have the pop culture tie-in of the previous offseason. Dan Marino filmed Ace Ventura.
Yes.
Where a missed field goal at the end plays a major role.
Yes.
Not to spoil too much, I'll start getting back toward the beginning of this game. Yeah, the game you mentioned at Pittsburgh. They go to Pittsburgh, who would be the eventual AFC title participant. They go there, lose in overtime, and then they have a game that could really decide which team eventually goes on to win the division, and then they have that fake snap game where Marino pulls them past the Jets. Irving Fryer, you have O.J. McDuffie, who would later on lead the league in receptions during the season that we did on the first episode, 1999 for the Dolphins. But young O.J. McDuffie, Mark Ingram, I think, was injured at this point. And then Keith Jackson at tight end, who would rip the Chargers defense to shreds in the first half of this game. Yeah. Do you think this is the most underrated trio of receiving weapons that Marino's had?
It was, definitely underrated. It was definitely the best that he had since Clayton and Duper, I think. Although obviously that's not a trio, but Fryer was legit. McDuffie kind of came on, I think, later in the season a little bit and earned Marino's trust, because McDuffie was young and Marino was 100 years old at the time. And Keith Jackson was, like, as the kids say, low-key dominant through parts of that season. And Marino knew it. Marino would just fire it into to Jackson no matter where he was, no matter what the coverage was. And I have to say that looking back at highlights of that season, Marino's arm was really lively. And I say that as someone who doesn't watch or analyze film at all, but it just looked like he had an incredible amount of zip on every pass. When you compare it, especially to like the 98, 99 seasons, where he basically just had nothing on the ball every time he dropped back, kind of like Peyton Manning, although not as dramatic as Peyton Manning, because Peyton could barely throw it 15 yards by the end.
The Dolphins, they record their first quarter passing touchdown of the season. Marino finished the season third in total passing touchdowns behind Favre and Young, but had not thrown a single one in the first quarter. I think they really tried to establish a little bit, and yet he still managed to pull off 30, though his first one of the season was in this game, and it was to Keith Jackson. They were able to mess with the Chargers defense by motioning Keith Jackson, or having Keith Jackson split out and having receiver motion to his side and have him cutting in. And they have one Marino throw in this game where Jackson runs an out and up, and Marino just has the mustard on it to hit that past the first line of defense and right before the safety, like even fading away. I mean, as far as a quarterback who could be pressured and kind of step aside and being off his platform and hit a pass 20 yards on the field that can't float. Marino did it as beautiful as anyone I can remember.
He had great feet, right? I mean, just the ability to move around, not mobile, but the ability to just dance, boom, 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 avoid rushers. It was really, really something I don't really think you see that much. I mean, maybe Phillip Rivers has gotten good at that because Rivers is just literally a statue. But Marino was probably the best ever at doing that.
Yeah, and Keith Jackson with the first 2 touchdowns of this game. The playoff performer on another episode I did with Eric Eager, we looked into the Packers win in San Francisco against Steve Young in the mid-'90s. And Keith Jackson for the Packers was the unexpected star of that game. Mm-hmm. If DFS existed at this time, if you had DraftKings, Keith Jackson, I imagine, tight end this weekend would have gotten you there, except Jay Novacek. It was actually an odd divisional round weekend. We're like thinking about, hey, should I run a tight end in the flex? Should we get real nuts? Uh-huh. But this game is also inspired by Living the Stream. The game is called #RefuseToBeCute. So you have 4 games with some pretty big stars this weekend. You got Niners hosting the Bears, then the 90s Cowboys hosting the Packers.
Yeah.
And you got this battle here with San Diego and Miami. And then you have Pittsburgh hosting Bill Belichick's Cleveland Browns. Were there any other players this weekend you think it would be a little too cute to avoid playing?
Well, I feel like it would probably be too cute to fade Natron Means.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the hindsight, of course, is 2020, but Means was the workhorse on a team that was committed to establishing the run no matter what. As you said, I mean, they were losing for, all but 1 minute of the game or 30 seconds of the game, and they continued to hammer the run. So I feel like Means probably would have been a guy who, he goes into it was a home game. They were a 3-point favorite. Is that right?
Yes, the Chargers, 3-point favorites at home.
So I feel like against sort of a middling run defense in the Dolphins side, I feel like that would be one where you're just like, I got to do it. It feels a little like Derrick Henry in these past playoffs, where you're just like, let's not be dumb. Let's not get too cute, as you said.
Yeah, if I jumped in my time machine and brought DraftKings with me, I would refuse to be cute and start Barry Foster from the Steelers game. Mm-hmm. How about this level of testosterone? The Steelers win 29-9 against the Browns. Barry Foster, a running back, 24 carries for 133. Bam Morris, another running back on the Steelers, 22 carries for 60.
Wow, really?
Yeah, this is a T weekend. Emmitt Smith, because he left the game early with an injury against the Packers. And then in the Niners game, if you ran Ricky Waters, you got bit because they just smashed the Bears, and Floyd vultured 3 touchdowns for them. To your point about Natron Means, Trumpy, the color commentary guy, he said some stuff that also blends into the other game, I'm Not Owned. So would these comments by him about Natron Means own you?
Okay.
Running the sweep with Natron Means, it's like a pass.
That's good. It's like a pass, only not a pass. But yeah, no, that definitely is. I feel a little owned. Yeah.
So just 240-pound running back running outside the tackle as basically a pass. Oh, and one more from Trump. He says, "Now that's the way you use Natron Means. You get him at those defensive backs, soften him up." There's a lot of tea going on during this broadcast.
That is, man. I mean, that's such a. I remember those kind of. I don't think that announcers say that much anymore. That sort of thing. Soften them up. I mean, that is like horrifying imagery. Soften them up. Soften them up for what? For the kill? Like, what's going to happen to the defensive backs?
The first quarter, you get one touchdown from Keith Jackson. The second quarter, he gets pay dirt again. Chargers have 2 possessions inside the 10-yard line, and then they also get deep in Dolphins territory. Besides that, only come away with 6 points. Dan Marino hits Mike Williams for touchdown pass right before the half. Dolphins go in 21-6 to intermission. How good are you feeling?
Feeling great, and I also am realizing now that there have been 47 receivers with the name Mike Williams over the course of my NFL watching life. But yeah, no, feeling good because this is like, if you build a decent lead, it'll get you there. I was feeling good, Thomas. And
do you remember were you just at your house watching the game? Were you in public managing this anxiety?
No. I was at home. I was watching with my best friend and my dad. My best friend didn't root for or against the Dolphins, but he had a soft spot for the Chargers for some reason, and it really, really bothered me. For some reason, as a kid, I really disliked Junior Seau. Rest in peace. I have nothing against him as an adult, or when he was alive, of course. But as a kid, for some reason, I was so bothered. I think it was he owned the Dolphins so hard during certain times where, and he would do like the dance and like get in people's faces. And as a 10-year-old, I would be like overcome with negative emotion. And you can't, as a kid, you try to reel it in, but you can't. You just lose control. So I had some bad feelings for those Chargers.
Listeners out there will be hearing the audio, but you have a nice shade of Dolphins blue on your shirt. And at the time, you had one of those sweet Dolphins, very 90s hats that Marino had on the sideline. Did you get it because you saw him with it on the sideline, tilting his brains out?
Oh, man, yeah. That when you sent me that picture, before the show, Thomas sent me a picture, and he said, would you ever wear this hat? And it has an extremely 90s baseball cap, Dolphins baseball cap on Marino. And I said, brother, I had that hat. I had every Dolphins hat that would come out in August. I think they released it just before the season started, and made by the same company. And I bought it every year, and I would wear it no matter what. I mean, if I had just gotten a haircut, I'm putting that thing on and I'm going out in it. If I'm playing wiffle ball at the field, I'm wearing it. If I'm throwing the football around with people, I'm wearing the damn hat. I wear that thing everywhere.
I mean, I remember, wearing, like, I'd go play sports, and I had a Randy Moss jersey.
Yeah.
And I go play sports in, like, elementary school, and it made me feel faster.
Sure. Yeah. No, dude. I probably wore a Dan Marino jersey in the summer, probably like on average, like 4 days a week. Because I had 3 or 4 different kinds. The teal one, the white one, the black one, which is not even a thing, but I got it for Christmas one year, and then I forget the other one. Oh, I think it was orange. Is that possible? Okay. So I had a bunch, and I wore those out, man, and I would wear them in 95-degree heat. Didn't matter. In
the 90s, as I've learned doing this podcast, any jersey alt is possible. Any amount of busyness on a piece of team apparel is possible. I have this brewing theory. I'm going to try to get it peer reviewed. But that in the 90s, if you change your team jersey to something that was full throttle 90s, you end up going farther. Like the Broncos changing their jerseys, they break through. The Rams change theirs. The Seattle Supersonics and the Utah Jazz get through the Western Conference. And I think Marino's hat, I'm going to say, gave him some special powers in coming back from that Achilles injury.
No, I think you're right. I hadn't thought about it like that, but you're right. I mean, the Jazz never made it to the finals until they finally changed their uniforms. Although I love the old Jazz uniforms.
Yeah, the old Jazz uniforms are great. The green and yellow Sonics ones are good too. And they go to very distinct 90s vibe. When I saw that Marino hat in the sideline, when they're showing the halftime stats, I could only think, this is the most 90s thing. I hope Denny owned this hat.
Oh, yeah. No, I had that for sure.
And then at halftime, they showed how Marino was 11 for 13 passing, well over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns in just the second quarter. And what transpires in the third quarter involves Marino only being able to attempt 3 passes. It starts with Chargers getting down to the goal line. Natron means fumbles. It hits the pylon, which would be a touchback. But because it was 4th down and because in the 70s the Chargers missed the playoffs on the holy roller play, where in that very stadium a Raiders player fumbled forward. Dave Casper recovers in the end zone for the Raiders. They win, and Chargers miss the playoffs. The NFL changes the rule that you can't fumble forward on 4th down. It comes back to where you are. So instead of Dolphins starting at the 20-yard line, they start at their own 1. They hand off to Bernie Parmalee, stuffed safety. No. A long drive for the Chargers begets another long drive for the Chargers. What was your tilt level at that moment? Did you leave the room? Did you eat more? Did you start screaming?
So I felt like at that point that the crowd was really into it. I'm not at 30, whatever I am, 36. I'm not a believer in the power of momentum. But in 1995, everybody was a believer in the power of momentum and the power of love. But the crowd getting into it and the Chargers coming back and the Dolphins, like I said, they were not a strong finishing team. Like they didn't have, as a team, they did not have a killer instinct on any level. So you in that position there at the 1-inch line, I remember distinctly thinking they're going to run it and it's going to be a disaster. And like, I was almost glad it was just a safety and not a fumble for a touchdown. because that it was so typical of that team to just be like, you know what, guys, we're not going to lose. We may not win, but we're not going to lose. And so the play there obviously was to let Marino drop back a few steps and throw a dart and get out of the shadow of the goalpost, as the announcers love to say. So that was devastating. And then the Chargers went crazy after that. The Dolphins were absolutely beaten down. That was a huge shift.
I think it's an undeniable advantage, at least compared to nowadays, where when the Dolphins have the ball against their own end zone, the fans are going wild. And nowadays, that only happens when the Chargers are against their own end zone on offense. It was the loudest I've ever heard that stadium in San Diego.
Yeah, man. Look, the Chargers used to have like a real home field advantage.
Yeah, that was wild to see. It was a real thing. And then we'll get into that down the stretch in this game. They would shoot cannons off after, and on the final drive of this game, which we'll eventually get to, on the final drive of this game, there's so much smoke on the field that you can barely see from the broadcast. You can barely see Don Shula scooting around on the sideline
because he tore his Achilles.
Just like Marino, yes. Shula and Marino both tore their Achilles. The Chargers embark on another long drive. They keep Marino on the sidelines. Total plays in this game would be 83 for the Chargers, 46 for the Dolphins.
What?
Which is crazy. Or at least passes and runs combined.
83 plays? I mean, just that in itself.
Yeah, 40 runs, 43 passes. And they kept the ball throughout the third quarter. They drive down to the goal line, fumble off the pylon, immediate safety, another long drive for the Chargers, touchdown, go from down 21-6 at the half with the safety and the touchdown to down 21-15. Now, they kept bringing up replay. The Natron means stepping out of bounds, Chargers touchdown.
Like, clearly, like it's not even close.
Yeah, and instant replay was around from 85 to 91. They got rid of it, came back in 99. But in 94, the announcers seemed to already be tired, and by January 95. Do you think that this game suffered greatly from not having instant replay?
I mean, I am a replay hater, and I would like to see it completely scrapped just for the sake of getting the game going and like the pacing of the game, the flow of the game. But as a fan, it is the worst possible outcome to have your team booted from the playoffs, because they missed a call, like a blatantly bad call. And now that I'm saying this, I can see why Saints fans are still not over that call with the Rams and Saints in the NFC title game,
right?
Because they had replay, so it still didn't help.
We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Couple Chargers touchdowns that may have been in, and then this touchdown by Natron Means actually out of bounds. I went through a lot of YouTube comments, and there's definitely instances where one person was commenting multiple times that this is all engineered at the Dolphins' expense to make the league bring back instant replay.
That's quite the conspiracy. Listen,
yeah.
I'm sure the NFL didn't want Dan Marino in a Super Bowl.
Yeah,
let's be honest. The NFL's aim was always to get Stan freaking Humphrey.
The best home game you could possibly think of. Yeah, Pittsburgh hosting Dan Marino is right up there. Potentially getting Dan Marino in a Super Bowl against Steve Young. I mean, do you think that this Dolphins team it would be a home game in Miami? Do they have a shot?
That's right. That was another factor throughout the season that I was super excited about, because I was like, if you get a home game in the Super Bowl, you win. That was my mindset. I used to write fan fiction about that, by the way. If I could find it, I would definitely put it on Twitter. I don't think I can. So, but I do absolutely 100% think the 49ers would have steamrolled the Dolphins, even if it's in Miami. That 49ers team was unstoppable in every way. Passing game, running game, defense, special teams. They had no weakness. They would have beaten the Dolphins. They would have crushed the Steelers. They humiliated the Chargers. That game was over in the first quarter. That game was over with like 8 minutes to go in the first quarter.
I'll go back to the game. I'm not owned. And late in the fourth quarter, Natron Means gets his 21st carry. The color commentator says, how many carries does he have? 21? I say 25 and they win.
And he ended up with 24?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So is he? So maybe he's owned. Maybe you're not the one who's owned because he didn't get 25 and they still won.
Well, I mean, the backwards correlation is always fun. And, I don't know who's owned by it. I would guess it's the person who's saying it, but just saying like, if you run it this many times, you will win. Trust me. That's hilarious. And amazingly, in the year 2020, we still see that. We still see you'll see like the main ESPN account tweet something like the Titans are 8-0 when Derrick Henry runs 22 times. Well, okay.
The announcers also got into some huge tilt when Keith Jackson catches a pass, attempts a forward lateral. That watching the replay, I actually kind of dug the effort. And knowing they didn't score again, you're like, yeah, go for that lateral, the Friars, see if it works. It becomes a forward pass or it's ruled a forward pass instead of a fumble recovered by the Chargers. Do you admire the moxie there?
That is some moxie. It's super dumb. But if you watch the replay, he's clearly trying to lateral it to his left, and somebody comes at the last possible second and comes and slaps his wrist. And so his wrist is his whole hand and arm are redirected forward, and he has no chance to go left. But if that last second slap doesn't come, that is a lateral to Fryer, and he probably doesn't score, but he picks up a few yards.
The announcers tilted on this for a good 15 minutes on and off. And then they go into high T mode to support their own case that it should be a fumble. And that official, Johnny Greer, is looking into the eyes of a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army, Bobby Ross, a company commander of a tank division, who wants to know how in the world can that be. Wow. So he's like, well, it should be a fumble. I'm right. He's an Army general, and he agrees with me.
Listen, man, you got to believe the troops would call that a fumble. That's all I'm saying.
Kind of odd angle Emerick went with. The referee better rethink that call. He's talking to a tank commander. It's like.
So what are you getting at? Is Bobby Ross going to shoot him with a tank? Is that the implication here?
I was trying to figure out, like, are you saying he's in physical danger? What's going on, Dick?
That's what I'm saying.
And then later on, the sideline guy, Dockery, he says, Dick, I just talked to Jerry Seaman, head of officials, and he told me it was simply this. It's an illegal forward pass, and he compared it to a quarterback running beyond the line of scrimmage and throwing the ball. It's a 5-yard penalty, loss of down. It's a very bizarre play, but he said it was called correctly by the officials. Back to you, Dick. And then Emerick just goes, I don't know. That sounds like a cover.
No, Dick. That was the right call. Get over it. I mean, you can always, especially back then, you can always kind of tell if announcers had a little money on the team.
I couldn't stop thinking, do they got Chargers -3? What's going on here?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's probably what was happening. I mean, over the years, Al Michaels hasn't even been, coy about it. Like, he's been like up front, like the game just went over with that field goal, and I hate that because he'll be like, and many people are upset that field goal went through the goalposts. We'll be back. Like, yeah, okay, you just lost $50,000, Al. Guess what? It doesn't matter to you at all.
One of my favorite things about going back in these old games is I just didn't notice it when I grew up, but like the announcer, like when noticing that the announcer is over tilting about one side losing has been one of the most entertaining parts that I've loved about rewatching these old games.
Well, yeah, because it's always like very vague references to betting, right?
Yeah.
Just like the over, the point spread. I mean, but they can't say it outright. They can't be explicit, but it's just coded language. It's like listening to like a 1960s song about sex. You have to listen to it very carefully.
Yeah. Natron Means, obviously took over the second half there. He was second in the NFL in first downs that season behind Emmitt Smith, tied with Barry Sanders. And the announcers, I guess one thing I did appreciate, they really illustrated and brought Marino's sideline tilt to the forefront. And one of the announcers would say, like, meanwhile, Marino says, when's my turn? Come on, tell them they pay me a lot to play, not watch. This is verbatim, them just saying this. And then Emerick goes, like a cat out there in the San Diego Zoo, Marino encaged on that far sidelines.
I remember announcers doing that a lot back then, but I also remember Fox being the first network that would slow down, that would do instant replay, slow motion instant replay for when players lost it on the sidelines and cursed a blue streak, right? So you would just see their mouths move. And you would go, what is he? Oh, my God. He said that to him? He called that? Wow. I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, you just get the Sam Darnold sideline face, just like, oh, my God. In your adolescence, seeing what really goes down the sidelines can be eye-opening. So you get into the fourth quarter, the Chargers get in position. It's 21-15. They run this crazy crossing route where Mark Say kind of goes through the line of scrimmage for the go-ahead touchdown. Marino has 40 seconds left. In that moment, how confident, I mean, knowing you have Marino?
Yeah, I used to be way overconfident when Marino would have a minute or two in the ball because, my dad had drilled it in my head that no one was better in a tight spot late in the game than Marino. That if anybody could do it, it was him. So as a kid, in 1995, I was 12. I remember, I guess I was probably 11 when this game was played. I remember having extreme confidence that he could get into field goal range and that Stojanovic could deliver. And I remember thinking, let's not discount a touchdown because, this is Marino. This is my guy. He's going to do it. He's going to do something positive. Yeah. We're going to win this game.
And Marino gets the ball right back, delivers a 32-yard strike that probably would have been caught by, I think, the fourth receiver or the fifth receiver on the roster. He gets clotheslined a tick before the ball gets there. The Dolphins are in position to take two throws even before kicking the field goal. And they both go to not McDuffie or Jackson or Fryer, to Mike Williams, a less used player. Mike Williams is also the player Marino targeted on the third down the previous drive that could have gotten them close to icing the game. Him and Marino weren't totally in sync. At the time, were you thinking, why are we not getting Fryer a shot in this situation or Keith Jackson?
I don't remember thinking that, but I do remember really focusing in on Jackson on a lot of key plays throughout that game and thinking, it's got to go to him. Because he was just humiliating the San Diego linebackers over and over and over again. They had single coverage on him, I think, through at least most of the game. Maybe they clamped down on him late in the fourth or something. But he was doing whatever he wanted. And I remember keeping my eye on him as much as you could, on the release from the line of scrimmage and maybe on short routes. But Mike Williams, he's probably the fourth or fifth option in that offense at the time. So it was surprising. Let's just say that.
Jackson, a player, the first 3 years of his career, all pro with Randall Cunningham and the Eagles, ends up in Miami. Marino and the offense was doing a good job of getting him split out in positions to make plays. But on those final two throws, they go slant to Mike Williams, popped up in the air by Junior Seau, great defensive play, nearly gets picked. Then on second down, Mike Williams is running open behind the defense to the end zone. They can't quite get the timing down, falls incomplete. And then Pete Stojanovic comes on. This the most deflated you've ever been after a kick. The snap is high, it's wide right.
Yeah, so the snap was one of the worst snaps you'll ever see that is actually caught, by the holder. Yeah. It's so high, probably 3 or 4 feet higher than it should have been. I will say that if it's going to be a missed field goal to end your season, vanderjagging it is better than missing it by a smidge to the left or right. And that's what Stojanovic did here. He vanderjagged it. The thing started 10 yards right of the right post, and it kept fading. So it never had a chance. You knew from the millisecond it was kicked that it was a miss. So I will say that was less torturous than a close miss. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge blow because, like I said earlier, the clock was ticking. Marino didn't have that much longer left, and you knew it. He looked great in that game. He looked great through parts of that season. It was amazing that he had come back from just a devastating Achilles injury. Like you said, people were not coming back from Achilles injuries at that time. So, for him to look that good, it was amazing. But you just, you kind of got the sense. I mean, he was probably in his mid-30s at that point. It wasn't common for players to play, like today, every quarterback plays till they're 49 years old. It's not, it wasn't like that back then. So to blow a chance like that to get to the AFC title game definitely was a gut punch. I do believe that was one of the games, one of the many games. I want to say that I cried after maybe 8 to 10 Dolphins games in my life, and that was definitely one of them.
Do you think this one took the longest to recover from?
I'm trying to think of a more devastating loss, and they did well. I actually think that losing to the Bills in the AFC title game in 92, I want to say, was maybe worse. But I think that was a blowout, if I remember correctly. So it wasn't the same kind of heartache, just varying degrees of heartache. But to get to the AFC title game was something different than losing in the second round of the playoffs. And I don't think that the Dolphins would have beaten that Steelers team anyway.
How electric that offense looked for stretches, especially in the first half and the second quarter of this game. Is that the one team that gives the Niners the best shot in a Super Bowl from the AFC?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would love to believe, that the Dolphins could give the Steve Young machine, that were the 49ers that year, a run for their money, as the Zoomers are saying. I just can't imagine that. Even if Marino had a great game and threw for 400 yards and a few touchdowns, it just feels like that Niners offense was so efficient and so brutal in the way that they took teams apart.
Yeah.
I just seriously doubt that Miami could hang with them.
If what you say happens and Marino plays out of his mind in the Super Bowl, but the Niners still put up 50 on the Dolphins defense because they're not stopping him, does that change the way we talk about the best quarterbacks of all time conversation today? Does Marino come up in that conversation more often if he does get a chance in that Super Bowl to play well?
No. My just short answer to that is no, because the only thing that matters in these all-time quarterback discussions is Super Bowl wins. That's all it comes down to, is just, did they win the Super Bowl? And that's why, just stupidly, Troy Aikman is in the Hall of Fame. Troy Aikman has no business being in the Hall of Fame, except for that he won 3 Super Bowls. I mean, it's good, good for him, but that, he doesn't. For me, that doesn't make you like a lock for the Hall. Of course, Marino would have gotten in anyway, no matter what happened. But no, I think if they go to the Super Bowl, Marino has a great game. They lose, 49-21. I think that he is still kind of, left out of that all-time great quarterback talk, which is really just, well, it just boils down to Brady, Montana. Who else? Elway.
Yeah, Brady, Montana, Elway. It's seen for a short bit that Rodgers might make a case, and that kind of died off the last 5 years.
But then again, look at Brett Favre should be in that conversation, but he won one. And so if he had won both of the Super Bowls, because he did lose one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if he had won both of the Super Bowls, I think that he would be thrown in that conversation. But all that matters in the end is Super Bowl victories. I think that's, as a Dan Marino truther, I think that's unfortunate. Yeah.
My last question: will you join me in 2020 in kind of popping into these conversations and going, oh, what about Marino? Maybe anytime someone puts a goat emoji next to Brady, just drop a "what about Marino" in there.
Yeah, I will, Thomas. I will join you in this mission to troll the hell out of anybody who calls Tom Brady the GOAT, because they're just forgetting about Marino. As soon as I remind them, and as soon as you remind them, I'm sure they'll be like, oh, right. I forgot. I'm sorry. or they'll come back at you and say, he never won the big one.
Yeah, and that's that's all the exhilaration I need from this convo that I'm having with a stranger is that they said he didn't win the big one. I just smile like that is the end all be all. Yeah, and in my past podcast, I've talked about different people I'd like to get in the Hall of Fame. Marino's already in the Hall of Fame, but maybe we get on top of on some listicles.
No, you're right. I mean, you're right. It drives me nuts when he's left out. I follow a lot of like film analysis accounts, and they will tweet highlights of Marino's early 80s seasons and be like, the fact that he was doing this back then is the most overlooked part of maybe the entire history of the league. That he was putting up those numbers and making the throws and throwing as much as he did back then. It just wasn't happening. No one was doing that. And, the Dolphins were, and he was.
This has been another episode of Remember That Game. Please rate, review, subscribe, and check out more episodes.